an anime classic of almost unrivaled failings. Long review. Elfen Lied is a 2004 anime adaptation of a manga by the same name, of some repute. Upon its initial release, it performed remarkably well in the burgeoning Western anime circle, while in Japan it was received with much more lukewarm of a reception. As someone who attempts to review anime in an impartial fashion, Elfen Lied is something of an enigma, in that while objectively it's not just a narrative failure, but downright careless and offensive, all while atoning that with an above-average production. Subjectively, it has touched the hearts of many and become a perceived classic. It's Mel's 56th most listed show, which by my logic would dictate it succeeded, if only by accident. We'll try to go over this seeming dissonance a little further on, but let's first cover the spoiler-free items of the production of Elfen Lied, as it's important to understand it as a whole. Direction, animation, and music. By far the property's stronger elements are its high-quality production values. Indeed, the entirety of its out-of-10 score is attributed to these factors. The music of Elfen Lied has been much talked about in the past. The OP song, Lilum, is politely dense. It, like the show, has invoked a great many feelings from those who hear it, with some finding it relaxing and others disconcerting. To me, it's always felt melancholic, which I do think is fitting for the show's overall tone, but in a way gave me a false impression of what was to come at the start of each episode. Nonetheless, it's an impressive piece of music, and one that almost single-handedly gives the show its contemplative feel, similar to that of, say, Serial Experiments Lane, however fitting that is, and deserves ample credit for it. The outro song of similar flame, Be Your Girl, by Chiko Kawabe, has been often described by the likes of the YouTuber Hazel as nostalgic of 90s and 2000s J-pop, and I can agree with that sentiment. It's a fun song, not unusual to find for its time and relatively fitting. A degree of tension release at the end of each episode is much appreciated. More pressingly, we have the background OST. It's undeniably strong and even unique in places. Further, I'm a sucker for tracks like Kametsu, and generally speaking, the composition of the OST is great, with tracks like Hakuru excellently ramping up the tension of battle scenes. However, the glaring issue the whole anime as a package has is this massive over-reliance on Lilum. There is a corrupt version, a piano version, a music box version, a short version, an instrumental track, a long version, an insert version, etc., etc., some of which are played more often than once. This becomes especially evident in the anime's second half, where barely a dramatic moment can go by without some variant of the song playing, and not just as a leitmotif, but rather the actual focus and driving force behind far too many scenes for what's healthy. On the one hand, this could be perceived as an attempt to give the show a sort of trance-like feeling, and in that aspect, one could posit it succeeds, yet in my opinion it becomes little more than a crutch when the same core music is played ad nauseum, and for that a few points have to be removed, as it were. But on paper, the OST is indeed quite impressive. The animation is similar to the score, in that on merit it's also quite good. We'll talk about the direction in particular in just a moment, but all in all the animation does generally meet an above average standard, with the background art being the real standout. While a lot of the show only uses a handful of locations, flashbacks and the like, get the same treatment, giving the artwork of the show, the actual depictions of the town the story takes place in, the shrine or the ocean next to the many battles, a downright beautiful look that blew me away each and every time a new still was shown forth. Yet in contrast you have the actual digital composites. The character designs are fairly mediocre, and while I appreciate the directorial decision to have the Diclonius be Pinkhead to further emphasize the discrimination aspect of the story, by far its strongest theme, it caused them all, especially the ones in the flashbacks, to just blend together. Meanwhile, of the 5 principal characters, 4 have fairly similar haircuts, and are all either short and flat or tall and blessed. It's not ideal. Moreover, while the general animation in the likes of the fights and slice-of-life scenes is fine, it looks all the worse for being overlaid on such brilliant backgrounds, as such giving the whole thing a mismatched feel, and it's a show that I think many could have make a good case for as one of the worst examples of the early 2000s period of anime growing pains. The backgrounds are beautiful, but that just makes the characters look worse. Still, above average in total. The aforementioned directing, however, is far more impressive in subtle ways. For one, without nearing too close to spoiler territory, the director made the solid choice to deviate heavily from the manga. From character hair colours to character motives and story beats, he did far more than just that. I've spoken before at length on how the likes of School Days and Shuffle use rather complementary directing to add to a story's tone and messaging, without ever being all that noticeable, to the point where many who dislike those shows will completely ignore the brilliance of their directing in order to keep babbling about how much they're upset by the story. Like with them, Elfen Lied has a methodical style, with ample amounts of neat visual storytelling, much of which I didn't even catch myself until others pointed it out. It's a style I like, but more importantly, it's in my view that the director, or had the director not gone the route he did, Elfen Lied could be an even bigger mess. That's not to throw flack at the manga, I haven't read past the surface level, but rather to say that a far less cohesive narrative and presentation, one which would essentially have served as little more than an advert for the manga, could have easily been the result here, like we far too often see for many shows nowadays. For all this, and against all my grievances with the show, directing is maybe the one place where it shines brightest, and deserves appropriate praise for that fact. Story and character. Thus far, one might think I've done little more than praise the property, and indeed, if my initial trio of points were all I had to say, then a 7 or 8 out of 10 could easily be on the table. Unfortunately, like most good scoring systems, I work on the principle that the production values make up between half and a third of the overall score, always maintain flexibility, of course, with the rest dedicated to the plot, its inhabitants, and enjoyment. The narrative of Elfen Lied is very anime. It's heavily indicative of the tropes that abounded in the decades following Evangelion's massive popularity boom, and even seems to take some influences from the likes of Akira and Ghost in the Shell, which reportedly the author's biggest inspiration of Love Hina. Sadly, it doesn't take enough to even be a passable shadow of any of those 4 titles. I'll delve more into it post the spoiler tag, but Elfen Lied is a story that throws everything the author can at the board, but then goes no further. Sure, it has a sufferer of sexual abuse, a girl with sexual feelings, many girls, lots of girls, very few boys, who've been physically abused and experimented on, psychopathic murderers, etc., but it doesn't actually do or say anything with these such topics. If you've read anything else by me, you've probably picked up that I'm a big advocate that stories should be allowed to be about whatever they want, as long as they are respectful. The anime Super Lovers is a primary relationship between a minor of 16 and an adult of 24, but it always makes sense, sure, to... But it always makes sure to highlight how that relationship is abnormal and immoral, while also exploring why exactly a minor might like an adult and vice versa. It doesn't go majorly in depth or anything, because ultimately it's a slice of life show about opening a cafe, but the point is it both acknowledges the severity of the character's choices and is respectful and balanced about it. That's coming from what I'd not even call a good example of what I'm referring to. Elfen Lied, however, just presents stuff as fetish tropes. For example, Yuka, who's sort of a protagonist, is in love with Kota, and despite knowing he had a traumatic childhood, still grows violently jealous when he so much as talks to the other girls. Yet that relationship dynamic is never explored or resolved. We never actually get a reason why Yuka likes Kota, not even a classic anime, he saved me from some bullies kind of deal. She just likes him, and that's that. It's her entire character, no arc, no learning to move past or embrace her incestual feelings, just sibling cousin fan service that goes as... I think I'm already honing in on the characters at this point, but really, as this is a character-driven story, the plot itself generally plays second fiddle to the players, with the exception of the first episode, returning briefly for the last episode, kind of. And this is just a bit bland. It's a story that desperately requires its themes to be enacted on, seeing as its premise is about the human trait of discrimination against anything we don't understand. And so without being able to follow through on such a lofty theme, it falls entirely flat. Aside from this most major issue, there is a prevailing theme of contrivances. These are the sorts of problems that within a good show one would call nitpicks, but they are so frequent in Elfen Lied that the plot often seems to be constructed from a series of astronomical coincidences duct-taped together. In maybe the best of these, minor spoiler I guess, Kota and Yuka in the one and only sequence in the entire anime where they actually go to college classes, just so happen to bring along you, a girl Kota knows the police and maybe even the army are after, whom can't speak more than a handful of words and has an affliction for repeatedly groping strange women, a bad track record with toilet usage, a short attention span, and distinctive horns plus bright pink hair donning her head. It's a class with them, and just to top it off, It happens that a professor who only teaches a couple of their classes, and whom we know probably skips a lot of lectures to focus on his lectures, or on his research, or just be lazy, happens to be there, and he in turn just so happens to be the son of the head director of the research lab that held Lucy captive at the onset of the story. Minor spoiler end. That's not even all of it. But to go any further really would be pushing the spoiler envelope. The point is the whole story is like this. A good writer will periodically be forced to lead on a coincidence, and the premise of most stories is contrived to a degree. What if Amaro got in the Gundam and it didn't have any power? Goodbye 40 plus years of real robot anime. Yet in Elfen Lied's case, it's more like every plot development depends desperately on these choices to function. Choices which force you to believe that not only are the characters involved mind-bogglingly lucky, stupid, brain-dead, etc., but that the world at large has got it out for them. It's cheap and very poor writing, which with good characters could be saved to a degree, but the characters, well, they arguably fail even more than the story itself. Because the plot is so riddled with contrivances and coincidences, the characters are simply used as needed in any given scene, more like toys in a box than people. Yet then there's Lucy. When people say X character deserved a better story, it tends to ruffle my radar a bit, because to me a good character can't exist in a complete write-off of a story. So then, what's the deal with Lucy? Loved deeply by many, she is definitely the most compellingly written, but that isn't saying much. Her psychopathic tendencies turns off and on like a switch, which could be a direct commentary on mental illness, but I struggle to give her that much credit. Rather, while she does deserve a badge or something for being one of the two actual characters in the story, she's still a muddled and confused mess of great concepts and relatability, but incredibly poor execution. Director Kurama is the other character of the story. His arc is generic and predictable at every turn, but in a way that's okay. While he could have been an infinitely more interesting character if a single one of his treads were properly explored with depth, he does reach a passable standard. Everyone else, however, including our de facto protagonist Kota, is bland and emotionless. A real disappointment to watch as they continually make the choices that steer the story away from a more thought-out landing. Spoiler-free conclusion. It takes a special kind of pretentious to tell fans of a show that they're purely nostalgic, or that they were little more than children when they enjoyed a property, and far be it for me to be one of those people. After watching Elfen Lied, and while reading and seeking analysis and reviews for why people loved it so much, I was acutely aware that Elfen Lied wasn't for me. One thing, I'm a white guy in a peace-loving country that doesn't so much as have earthquakes or tornadoes on anywhere near a regular basis. My sexuality has always been something Sexuality has never been something I've been persecuted for, nor has my gender or race ever caused me grief, but in a way it's more than that. I always find when an AniTuber reviews something and says, it's okay if you like it, but it can come off as contrived more often than not. Rather, I prefer, if I can, to at least try and partially understand why someone likes a piece of media. And to me, with Elfen Lied, it isn't definitive things that makes this show. The generally above average production values aren't the main source of the love, but rather it's more the ideas. I don't think young people latch onto these characters because they dream of being abused or living out some weird as fuck fantasy harem thing. Neither do I think they come for the empowerment of minorities, because that sure as heck ain't what's here past the very surface level. No, the subjective reason people seem to love this show is far more complex than that. Much like humans, and in a weird way, that's sort of the point of Elfen Lied. Well, sort of. It's kind of the property's biggest boom and hurdle. It clearly fails to say anything of substance about discrimination and those adolescent feelings of alienation in modern society. But despite failing to succeed, it does still appeal to those same minorities. It's not so much an age of your audience thing as it is about the fact that sometimes you need something to latch onto, to see yourself in. So accidental or not, that has to count for something. So whether you should or shouldn't watch Elfen Lied is actually something of a tricky question. I don't think this deserves to be counted among other great anime classics, nor should it be on everyone's to-do list, and I don't personally feel I missed out on much by pushing this one off for so long. Moreover, later into this essay I'll be giving suggestions for other anime that people who like Elfen Lied should also check out. Shows that touch on similar feelings, emotions, and topics, but actually go the full distance and try to speak to their audience in a meaningful way, rather than just abusing their insecurities to push more DVDs. So, if anything, I think the show should long have been relegated to the dustbin of obscurity. And yet, if you're having a hard time, maybe being bullied or just feeling unhappy in your own skin, maybe rejected for something by your parents, then I can't, with a clear consciousness, say you won't get something from this. In which case, you should definitely give it a try. But after, make your way back here, and hopefully I or others can suggest something a little more meaningful once you've had your cathartic fill of blood and guts. Spoilers ahoy, be your girl. Now that we have the niceties out of the way, I would like to keep things quite brief and move straight into my prior mentioned recommendations for more suitable anime. However, I'd be remiss and arguably disrespectful if I didn't first delve into a little more detail on what the problems with the show's narratives and characters are. As my title implies, a lot of Elfen Lied's issues can be derived back to its bizarre harem elements. Problems such as its complete lack of any real goal, its abhorrent treatment of women, and its manipulative fetishization of the female gender. Like I already stated, I'm not personally offended or anything by a lot of these choices, but rather it strikes me as incredibly wrong on behalf of people who most certainly didn't ask for my opinion. We'll go through in terms of severity. First off, we have Yuka. Her hang-ups is an incestuous crush on her college-aged cousin and male lead character Kota, whom she hasn't seen for some years. Putting aside some fairly egregious animeisms, like how Yuta is still in love with a guy she hasn't seen since they were children for seemingly no reason whatsoever, the story doesn't actually intend to do anything with Yuka. What I mean by this is that while some may relate to her struggle of forbidden love, that's all it is, a label. There's nothing deeper here, as eventually the two kiss, and then it's borderline never mentioned again. No exploration of how much it hurt to suppress her feelings past a couple cuts of her looking forlorn, no introspection or hesitation on the part of Kota when she makes her advances, and no resolution or helpful message to the arc at all. This example is somehow the least troublesome and least immoral, in that it's just a minor romance subplot. All the other girls, however, suffer the exact same issues as Yuka, but are afflicted with much more serious problems to overcome. Not that Yuka isn't, but we're speaking relatively here. So second we have Nana, which with my master level understanding of the Japanese language I can tell you means 7. Nana has been abused presumably since birth, being subjected to all forms of incredibly dubious torture because of how she was born, and in spite of the fact that she's never shown any aggression towards humanity. This premise alone is a lot, but as the story progresses, the problems develop further. For one thing, Nana, though once showing signs of having a darker side, seems to be in complete control of her powers, and therefore proves that the Diclonius are not inherently evil by birth. Except no one ever addresses this, like, ever. Instead it's just talked about as if she's an anomaly, playing a long game or a ticking time bomb. Now don't get me wrong, I can believe to a degree that the insinuation might be that the institution might believe this, but what about Director Kurama? Surely, knowing Nana is a good person should affect him more and make him want to reach out to his daughter or try different methods of recovery for Lucy. And what about Lucy? The story is rife with potential for her and Nana to properly debate their viewpoints, for Nana to show Lucy how she can change, or go the darker route of having Lucy force Nana to acknowledge that she is too hardwired to kill. But they just don't bother. The OVA, to its credit, actually sort of tries to reconcile this by having us see Nana come to realise that she isn't evil. Then by proxy, Lucy's alter persona of Nu could genuinely be good as well. And that furthermore, Lucy is still a person. But that's all in the OVA, and even then it's not exactly done well. Plus, the OVA is maybe the best example of the final cross Nana's character has to bear. Let's make continued and repeated jokes about disability. Yes, indeed, during the anime and OVA, entire scenes are dedicated not just to showing how unaccustomed to average life Nana is, but also to making her artificial limbs the butt of every joke. I'm sure it's not meant to be, but I can't help but find it sickening how many of these there is. Now, jokes like this can be done in good taste and good faith, but these feel purely for a cheap laugh. What's more important, though, is how the story seems to completely forget itself. Nana almost immediately learns how to use her limbs, and other than a run-in with a cruel, creepy crep man, she gets used to civilian life pretty fast. But in truth, shouldn't Nana falling through doors and tripping up on her unusual limbs be tragic? Shouldn't it be there to emphasize the cruelty and discrimination has led to when a truly innocent girl is maimed beyond belief before rejecting, before being rejected for her lack of societal knowledge, all after being tossed out like garbage? Don't get me started on how they use a fake out death for her on 3 separate damn occasions. Nana is so insincerely portrayed. In any given scene, she'll get brutally beaten to a pulp, or in one mind-boggling scene, repeatedly flung off a bridge onto concrete, only to be back on her feet a few minutes or moments later. Maybe it's another of those nitpicks, but the Draconiusly are, physically speaking, still human to the best of my knowledge, which makes all these battles involving the two of them bizarre, as the likes of number 27 should have been able to decapitate Lucy with a strong single strike once the battle got difficult, and yet she got bored of playing or something, but I digress. Yet in the next scene, her genuine disabilities and inexperience will be played for laughs, and oops, I'm a klutz moments. With respect to any Nana fans, it's straight up disgusting, and she isn't even the worst of the cast. Lucy herself has many of the same struggles to face, although she does possess all her own limbs, so I guess that's something. Like Nana, she had been unfathomably abused physically, while also going through a monumental amount of mental trauma, from dog beatings to split personalities, simple isolation and guilt-ridden grief. She's had it rough. How does the story handle this? It has her revert to a child, nay cat-like state of mind in which she remains in every non-action scene. This other state is one she actually hints at being in control over, and doesn't appear to be related to the bandage persona that she sees in her mind during her flashbacks, which accompany the awakening of her powers. Okay, so she's had it tough, and she had a childlike defense mechanism. Fair enough. Except they then proceed to treat New like some form of joke. Much like how Nana's disability is just a comedy skit, New is an oddly perverted excuse to have Lucy grope the other girls, piss herself, need male assistance in garment changing, and to keep the plot on hold until the writers finally decide to inform Coulter of the world's going on. There's no commentary on bipolar syndrome here, nor is Lucy's suffering ever given any real thought. It ain't nuanced that we never get a clear answer as to whether she's a good or bad person. The writer's just lazy writing. Do you sympathise with Lucy? Can you understand her feelings of wanting to run away or destroy the whole world on a tough Monday morning or anxious Sunday evening? Well, then I totally understand that. But she is not your hero. The property is not saying this to try and give you a kindly pat on the shoulder. Instead, it takes your feelings, condenses them into an anime waifu, and then creates poor New to allow the harem elements to flourish. That's all there is to it. There is nothing deeper to Lucy. Well, not exactly. Like I said in my earlier character section, there is a lot going on with Lucy, and some of it is even good. But ultimately, if you take the empty DVD boxes of your 3 favourite anime together, yes, you now have 3 great boxes combined, but you can't open any of them. The artwork in the middle one is obscured, and the discs aren't inside any which way. There's no substance. It's literally hollow writing. I'll loop back to Lucy momentarily, as I do want to stress that I don't think it's all as evil as I maybe make it sound. I think the writer really did put some genuine experience and personal emotions into this story. However, I think he struggled to decide whether to be a harem writer or a psychological thriller author, neither of which he seems to have any experience enough to tackle. Finally, we have poor sweet Mayu. Why is Mayu in this show? If you're feeling generous, you could credibly say they use her to demonstrate how humans will be cruel even to their own kind, their own kin in fact, and I believe that is the narrative intention. But how does Mayu function as a generic emoticon character? This would be fine, well, as fine as it ever is in any other anime. No, the problem is that Mayu isn't a normal little sister character. Mayu's story is one of the bleakest in all of anime, and yet it's glossed over and handled with as little tact as I think humanly possible. Let's quickly review her situation in her particular focus episode, shall we? After her initial encounters with the All-Star Gang and Bando the Bandito, she flees the hotel house in Pimplayer due to not wanting to impose on Yuka and Kota. Presumably, this is a decision informed by the fact she believes she really is the cause of her mother and father's cruelty towards her, and that she really feels she is a nuisance, which is obviously relatable thread for many viewers. She heads for her usual beach, where the owner of her little dog appears, reclaims said dog, and then proceeds to berate the little homeless girl for being unhygienic. Following this, Mayu, alone in her shelter, is suddenly accosted by the police, who tell her she's been reported for sleeping on or infringing private property. She attempts to flee, not wanting to be sent back home, and is now forced into a howling gale of a storm that just so happens to be passing. It bears mentioning that during all this we learn her history of being sexually abused by her stepfather, which she'll make sure to use as an opportunity for as many nudity shots as possible, against her will, and which her mother blamed her for. To summarise, Mayu runs away from home after being raped by her stepfather and blamed by her birth mother, then has her small loyal dog taken away for seemingly forever, is kicked out of her shelter by the police with the fear of getting sent home to her literal rapist dad, into the lashing rain. She also isn't wearing any trousers at this point. And to top it all off, guess what fucking day it is? It's her friggin' 14th birthday! I can't even. You might be asking what all this depravity is in aid of, and to be blunt, all that happens is Kota shields Mayu from the police, and somehow, and this takes a real jump of fate, adopts Mayu and enters her back into school in the space of maybe a week, all so that he can look like history's greatest non-fantasy white knight. Do Kota and Yuka have to battle to get the adoption rights or get Mayu re-enlisted in school? Of course not. Not so much as a single scene with her teacher or principal is shown. Does Mayu have frequent trauma that she has to work through? Maybe see a doctor or have to talk in a nice quiet moment with Yuka to show their strengthening familial bond? Nope. Instead, she immediately recovers and becomes a normal high school girl. The friggin' dog comes back. There's no, quest to get her literal sex-offending pedophile stepfather incarcerated, and I'd be fine with that if Mayu stressed that she didn't want to go through, but the problem is that it's just never brought up. But further, they go as far as to have Mayu get groped and to go through and other harem shenanigans moments by new activities which should be horrific for the poor child, but are played for laughs. There's no message about seeking help when you're in such a situation. The family angle is convenient at best, and ultimately, none of it matters. All that happens just because. The exact same message about how humans can be terrible to one another could have been conveyed just as well with shots of Mayu's abuse that obscured her 12 to 13-year-old cleavage. And the fact she ran away mid-attack easily would be shown by her not having shoes and socks on, rather than making a ridiculous pants joke, etc. Mayu is the way she is because it's more, I'm not even entirely sure what word suits better than misguided. The really sad thing is, inadvertently or otherwise, what Mayu's arc and pretty much all the characters really say is life will get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse until a dense but kindly man on a white stallion comes down from his perch in the heavens to save you. At which point all your trauma will vanish, your incredibly cruel parents will just hand you over, your school will re-accept you without need to worry about having fallen behind or being bullied on any such similar issues, your friggin' dog returns, and not even a lingering memory of the dark times remain. In that, there may be a nice message about how things can always get better, sure, but it's just so crooked and dependent on unrealistic expectations that I don't really think someone who feels useless and unloved like Mayu needs to hear this message. And that's sort of the point. From what I've read and heard, neither the original writer of the manga nor the director and screenplay writer for the anime are intentionally bad people. I don't think either is going out of their way to be offensive or to manipulate these atrocious circumstances for financial gain of a few, or even a lot, of extra DVD sales or magazine pushes. I really do think there's a piece of the author tucked in here. He worked the job he didn't really want, and only got round to his manga writing dreams quite far into his formative life. So it's no surprise he tries to channel some of that into his work, tries admirably to extrapolate his perception of society into relatable characters. The thing is, I don't think he knew how to do so. Of course, I wouldn't claim to be able to either, but from all I can tell, he didn't go out of his way to research the mental and physical illnesses the characters suffer from, or the likes of how hard it can be to adopt to artificial limbs, the likes of which Bando and Nana have. Nor did he do like the writer of Fullmetal Alchemist and go in search of real understanding of the likes of racism and discrimination. And to a degree, that's okay. It can allow an artist to express their personal experience in a raw and honest way. Unfortunately, however, his aspirations outweigh his ability. He just doesn't want to write of his struggle with the cruelty of society in an almost nihilistic self-made Ava style. He also wants to do soft-core porn harem, inspired by Love Hina, his supposedly main inspiration, and a psychological thing, and have a secret society, and a big old war, and a found family, and. It's all just too much. It all contradicts itself constantly. And the problem with that becomes that while he's focused on the harem and sci-fi, it results in the incredibly troubled young women of his story, who he doesn't have the breadth of experience to write adequately in the first place, to be debased into comedy and fan service tropes. It may not be intentional, but it's undeniably true that the group who've traditionally loved this franchise the most are being exploited, and that's deeply unsettling. It goes as far as to sometimes feel like a fanfiction OC writer, due to some terrible admin error, got given an official publishing deal. In fact, that's probably the best way to describe the property as a whole. No offence, and I really mean that, intended. I really want to stress that I'm by no means implying the feelings and emotions or emotional breadth people have found and put back into Elfen Lied are invalid, but simply that it strikes me that in reality, that degree of raw feelings that the author did try to originally channel did in its weird way make it true, that he struggled to be accepted as a man of a somewhat peculiar tastes and goals in life, that his disposition with the whole world is what reached out and still resonates with younger people to this day, rather than an actual good message of writing or, quality. I think it's this feeling that the director of the show tried so hard to capture, even at the cost of any objective sensibilities. And so in the weirdest of ways, this is expression, a sort of expression-filled art. The light at the end of the tunnel. Well, this is my second review in a row that was meant to be sub 3,000 words. Oops. As mentioned, before we wrap up, I want to try and be constructive for a moment and suggest some other properties that might sate your need for connection or understanding while actually caring about you and your feelings. I'll try to keep these spoiler-free and varied in theme and genre, so understand if... I'll try to keep these spoiler-free and varied in terms of genre, so understand if, for the likes of Shuffle, Laver and Revius, I refrain from actually specifying the conditions the characters are battling with. Additionally, it's worth mentioning that during my internet travels, I found Hazel's video entitled Why Do We Like Elfen Lied, which is by far the most comprehensive look at all the aspects of the show, manga, and general production available, and all from the perspective of someone who was actually a part of the Elfen Lied Western boom. She seems to me, at least, to be the perfect person to give a balanced and personal account, as well as a deep dive of this anime, and does so wonderfully. My only gripe being where she said, unless I misunderstood, she watched only the final episode of School Days, and from that decided it was irrelevant because we don't need more deconstructive harems or some such bad and remarkably shallow take from someone of her caliber. But the other 2+ hours are really brilliant. And if you read down this far of my essay, you owe it to yourself to check out hers. Now then, please note, I may add more to this list in the future, but obviously the video won't change, so feel free to check out the written list. First, let's quickly get Ava out of the way. Seeing as I've already mentioned it, like Elfen Lied, it has sometimes suffocatingly dark worldview. It's post-apocalyptic, with a second apocalypse seemingly imminent, and the whole cast of corrupt, morally bankrupt, or just broken people. I've seen many dislike it because they found it too human or depressing, but the reason I'd steer Elfen Lied fans that way is not because of the fact that it properly breaks down the horrors of its cast lives one by one, or that it succeeds in expressing the author's own battles with serious long-term standing mental illness and conveying a very personal message to so many of its audience over the years, but rather because beneath it all, the memes, the oncoming end of the world, the Machiavellian scheming of Sele, Neon Genesis Evangelion is hopeful of a brighter tomorrow and a happier outlook for its protagonists. Its world, and most importantly for us as the viewer, that's what it's really about. And I see that hopefully, and as I see it, and hopefully you can too. Next we have Soul Eater. I told you I'd jump around the genres. Soul Eater seldom gets any credit for having an actually strong female protagonist who is never sexualized and doesn't need to rely on a man to save her. Further, it deals in wonderfully delicate manners. it deals with in a wonderfully delicate manner with the likes of sexuality, elements of transgenderism, and parental abuse to a level of subtlety Elfen Lied can only ever dream of. Further, as someone who loves both the anime and manga, the original ending is not a problem. It's in keeping with the tone, and being brutally honest, I've seen what the moon looks like, and I'd argue the anime is actually more in line with the build-up than the manga is, in a sense. So don't let any of that stop you from watching it, and its brilliant production values. If a badass lead like Lucy is what draws you to Elfen Lied, then Maka's should suit you even better. Thanks to Hazel, I finally stopped putting off Gunslinger Girl, and I'm really glad of that. I've now completed it, though at the time of this essay I was 4 episodes in, and it was really interesting. But for our current discussion, I would posit that it's relevant in that it's everything a more focused version of Elfen Lied would be, from the tone and the girls' forced combat for all their lives, to even the art with its more toned backgrounds that far better meld with the foreground of its characters than Elfen Lied's aforementioned mismatched art style ever did. I can give it my full recommendation now that I've completed it, and it's well worth your time. It is, like I said, essentially Elfen Lied, but not shit. Interestingly, I think a lot of people may find the likes of ReZero a good substitute for Elfen Lied, as its careful dealings with isolation and the perceived responsibilities society places on us are really well done and may be helpful for younger people caught up in the grips of discerning how best to live their lives as they enter adulthood. Season 2 is an especial focus on that relationship when it comes to asking what our parents really want of us, while I wrote about the expectations and reality elements of Season 1 in its own review. Infinite Revias is a favourite of mine, and is criminally underwatched in the West despite having a decent dub. In connection to Elfen Lied, it presents a cast of characters whom we get to see go through hardships, and then watch how they cope with these situations in a nuanced and carefully orchestrated manner. Its exploration of adolescence, bullying, societal systems, and just plainly the pains of growing up in masterfully done and well worth a watch. It's just masterfully done and well worth a watch even outside our current context. As I said to another mal user recently, it's like Lord of the Flies in space, but with a gun, a mech, a super interesting spaceship, and women. Meanwhile, Shuffle is maybe one of the most acute comparisons one can make to Elfen Lied. It's got almost all the same elements, including sci-fi-esque magic, a found family unit, mental and physical illness, magic lollies, etc. However, it truly cares about these topics and treats them with the respect they deserve. Further, careful efforts are made so that it isn't always the protagonist on a white horse that saves the girls. Rather, they often have to work through struggles by themselves, or help one another out. It's far more encouraging of a story, with a much better view of illnesses than Elfen Lied's, and a good pick if you want to see things represented in your anime, but still through a light-hearted harem fantasy lens. It explores all avenues without turning characters into tropes or mocking their disabilities, and deserves a whole lot more praise for that fact. Closing thoughts. And with that we come to a close. This is definitely one of my more scattered reviews, and way longer than I was hoping. I also rather hope this isn't the first piece of mine that you've heard or read. However, that is in large part because Elfen Lied is so unique to talk about. An offensively badly written, childishly naive, and sexistly cruel story with characters accompanied by only an above-average production that can far from save the mess of ideas and high concepts it's working with. Should by all rights be a total write-off, and yet it most certainly isn't. So well, again I'd reiterate, if you are struggling, you should see Elfen Lied as little more than a comfort tool, and either seek real help, and I wish you all the best if you do, or watch more caring and considerate media. I'd be a complete fool to reject just how, important Elfen Lied is, and for that it deserves fair and honest discussion. My apologies again if this review is a little untoward in places, and I wish you all the best in whatever you may be endeavouring to struggle with. If any of this made any sense, then be sure to check out Hazel's much better video on the subject, and to hit the like button. With all that said, thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.
I'll tell you just one thing, you're always in my heart. I only want one thing, you to love me too, oh baby.